The sky above Velar Prime had turned black with enemy ships. For 47 days, the warships had circled the planet like hungry predators waiting for their prey to die. The bombardment had not stopped even for a single hour. Cities that had stood for thousands of years now lay in ruins. The beautiful crystal towers that the people had built with such pride were nothing but dust and broken memories. Deep beneath the surface of the planet, in bunkers carved from solid rock, the last survivors of an entire civilization huddled together in darkness. They numbered barely 30,000 now. Before the invasion, there had been billions of them living peaceful lives across their world. They had been scholars and traders and artists. They had never built weapons of war because they had believed the galaxy was a place where reason and diplomacy could solve all problems. That belief had cost them everything. Elder was the leader of what remained of his people. He was old even by standards, and his blue-gray skin had faded to a pale color that spoke of exhaustion and despair. He pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold metal wall of the bunker and felt the vibrations of another explosion somewhere far above. Each tremor reminded him that death was patient and would eventually find them all. His second-in-command was a younger named Myra. She had been a university professor before the war, teaching history to students who had dreamed of bright futures. Now she spent her days counting supplies and calculating how many more hours her people could survive. The numbers never improved. She approached with a data tablet in her hands, and her 3 eyes were red from lack of sleep. She had not rested properly in weeks. None of them had. "The shields are failing," she said quietly so that the civilians nearby would not hear. "The engineers estimate 3 days at most, perhaps 4 if we divert all remaining power." Nodded slowly. He had expected this news. The shields that protected their underground sanctuary were old technology designed to withstand natural disasters, not military assault. The weapons were far more powerful than anything the shields had been built to resist. "And the Galactic Council?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Myra's expression grew bitter. "They held their vote this morning. The Council has officially declared Velar Prime a lost cause. They will not send aid. They will not intervene. They have decided that the risk of angering the Empire is too great. So they sacrifice us to maintain peace. That is their reasoning. They have promised to end their expansion if the Council does not interfere here. Our extinction is the price of galactic stability." Closed all 3 of his eyes and let the weight of those words settle upon him. His people had done nothing wrong. They had harmed no one. They had simply existed in a location that they wanted to control, and for that crime they would be erased from the universe while the great powers of the galaxy watched and did nothing. In the corner of the bunker, a young girl sat with her mother. The child was perhaps 6 years old, and she clutched a small carved stone figure in her tiny hands. It was a toy her father had made for her before he died in the first wave of attacks. She did not cry anymore. The children of Velar Prime had learned that tears changed nothing, and hope was a luxury they could not afford. Her mother stroked her head gently and whispered words of comfort that both of them knew were lies. Everything would not be fine. Help was not coming. Tomorrow would not be better. Myra watched the mother and child for a long moment before turning back too. There was something different in her eyes now, a spark of something that might have been either madness or desperate courage. "There is one possibility we have not tried," she said carefully. "The humans." Looked at her with surprise. "The humans sealed their borders 50 years ago. They do not answer communications from the Council. They do not participate in galactic affairs. Why would they help us?" "Because they never signed the non-interference pact. They are not bound by the Council's decision. And because—" she hesitated as if afraid to speak the next words, "because I already contacted them." "You did what?" "Before the blockade was complete, I sent a message through the old relay networks. A distress call, a plea for help. I did not tell you because I expected nothing to come of it. The humans have ignored every attempt at contact for decades. I thought my message would simply disappear into the void like all the others." Stared at her. He was not angry. He was too tired for anger. He simply wanted to understand. "And did you receive a response?" Myra pulled a small communication device from her robe. Her hands were trembling slightly as she activated it. A recording began to play. It was a human voice, deep and clear, speaking in accented galactic standard. The message was only 3 words long. "We are coming." Listen to those words 3 times. Each time they sounded more impossible than before. "This could be a trick," he said finally. "They might have intercepted your message and sent a false response to give us false hope." "That is possible. Even if it is genuine, the humans are far away. Their territory is on the other side of the galaxy. Even with their fastest ships, it would take them weeks to reach us. We do not have weeks." "That is also true. And even if they somehow arrived in time, why would they risk war with the Empire for our sake? We are strangers to them. We have nothing to offer. There is no logical reason for them to help us." Myra nodded at each of his objections. She had thought of all these things herself during the long, sleepless nights, but she had also thought of something else. "The humans are not like us," she said softly. "They are not like any species in the galaxy. I have studied their history. They do things that make no sense. They fight battles they cannot win. They sacrifice themselves for people they have never met. They believe in concepts like honor and justice and compassion not as abstract ideas but as principles worth dying for." "You are describing madness." "Perhaps, or perhaps I am describing something we have forgotten. Something the galaxy lost long ago when we decided that survival was more important than principle." Looked around the bunker at his people. The elderly who had lived full lives and now faced death with quiet dignity. The young parents who held their children close and prayed to gods they no longer believed in. The children themselves who would never grow up to see what they might have become. "3 words," he said quietly. "We are staking everything on 3 words from a species we have never met." "Yes," Myra replied, "because 3 words are better than nothing, and right now nothing is all we have." Above them the bombardment continued. The shields flickered and groaned under the assault. Somewhere in the darkness, a child began to cry and was quickly hushed by her mother. And far across the galaxy, human ships were already moving. Commander Samuel Wright stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Defiance and watched the stars blur past as the ship traveled faster than light itself. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and gray hair that had once been dark brown before the weight of command had aged him. His face was weathered and lined, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He had served in the Earth Defense Force for 30 years, and he had seen more battles than he cared to remember. The bridge around him hummed with quiet activity. Officers moved between stations with practiced efficiency. Screens displayed navigation data and fleet positions and tactical assessments. Everything was orderly and calm despite the fact that they were racing toward what might be the largest military engagement in human history. Lieutenant sat at the tactical station. She was young for her rank, barely 30 years old, but she had earned her position through skill and dedication. Her fingers moved across her console as she monitored the fleet's formation and weapon systems. 15 minutes until we exit faster than light travel, she reported. All ships confirm ready status. Samuel nodded but did not speak. He was thinking about the message that had started all of this. 3 days ago, a distress call had arrived through channels that had been silent for decades. An alien species called the was facing extinction. Their planet was under siege. The Galactic Council had refused to help. They had nowhere else to turn. The decision to respond had not been difficult for Samuel. What was difficult was the knowledge of what that response would cost. He looked around the bridge at the men and women under his command and wondered how many of them would still be alive when this day ended. Corporal Danny was the youngest member of the bridge crew. He was 22 years old with dark hair and earnest eyes that still held the idealism of youth. He had joined the defense force because he believed in something bigger than himself. Today, he would find out if that belief was strong enough to carry him through what was coming. "Sir," Danny said, his voice slightly nervous, "I have been reviewing the intelligence reports on the fleet. Their numbers are significant. 18 heavy cruisers, 42 destroyers, and approximately 200 support vessels. They outgun us considerably." "I am aware of the numbers, Corporal." "Permission to speak freely, sir." Samuel turned to look at the young man. "Granted." "Why are we doing this? They are strangers to us. We have never even met them. The Galactic Council has made their position clear. If we intervene, we will be violating treaties and making enemies of half the galaxy. The political consequences could be catastrophic." The bridge fell silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing to listen for the commander's response. It was a question they had all been thinking, but none had dared to ask. Samuel walked slowly toward the main. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. 50 years ago humanity made a choice. We from galactic politics because we were disgusted by what we saw. Species being sacrificed for convenience. Genocide being permitted because intervention was inconvenient. Justice being weighed on scales of profit and power. We decided that if the galaxy wanted to operate that way, then we wanted no part of it. He turned to face his crew. But we never stopped believing in what was right. We never stopped caring about innocent lives. We simply waited for a moment when our principles would be tested. That moment has arrived. An entire civilization is about to be wiped out for no crime other than existing in the wrong place. They sent a message asking for help. What kind of people would we be if we ignored that message? Spoke up from her station. "They are not going to let us rescue the without a fight. They have too much invested in this conquest." "I know. We will lose ships. We will lose people." "I know that too. And you still believe this is worth it?" Samuel looked at her steadily. "Lieutenant, there are approximately 30,000 civilians trapped on that planet. Men, women, children. They have never harmed anyone. They are going to die unless someone helps them. I cannot make the universe fair. I cannot undo the terrible things that have already happened. But I can give those people a chance to live. And if that costs me my ship and my life, then I will pay that price gladly." The bridge was silent for several seconds. Then Danny spoke again, but this time his voice was different. The nervousness was gone, replaced by something harder and more determined. "Course confirmed, sir. Exiting faster than light travel in 10 minutes." Samuel nodded and returned to his command chair. Around him, the crew resumed their duties with renewed focus. Whatever doubts they might have had were set aside. They had a mission to complete. Sergeant Maria stood near the back of the bridge. She was the senior non-commissioned officer aboard the Defiance, and her job was to maintain discipline and readiness among the enlisted crew. She was a stocky woman with short gray hair and a face that rarely smiled. But as she watched the commander, she felt something she had not felt in years: pride. The minutes passed quickly. The fleet prepared for what was coming. Weapons were charged and shields were raised, and damage control teams stood ready at their stations. No one spoke unnecessary words. There was nothing left to say. "Exiting faster than light travel now," announced. The stars on the stopped blurring and became sharp points of light, and there before them was Velar Prime. It was a beautiful world with blue oceans and green continents and white clouds swirling across its surface. Or at least it had been beautiful once. Now it was with the black marks of orbital bombardment. Entire regions had been burned to ash. The atmosphere was thick with smoke and debris. And surrounding the planet like a swarm of metallic insects was the fleet. "Flagship is hailing us," Danny reported. "Put it through." The flickered and a face appeared. The species was vaguely reptilian with scaled skin and narrow yellow eyes. This particular individual wore elaborate armor decorated with symbols of rank and achievement. His expression radiated contempt. Unknown vessels, you have entered sovereign space. Identify yourselves immediately and state your purpose, or you will be destroyed. Samuel stood slowly and clasped his hands behind his back. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. This is Commander Samuel Wright of the Earth Defense Force. We are here in response to a distress call from the people of Velar Prime. We demand that you cease your attack immediately and withdraw your forces from this system. The commander stared at him for a long moment. Then he made a sound that might have been laughter. The humans, we had heard you became cowards hiding in your corner of the galaxy. This is not your concern. These creatures belong to us now. Leave while you still can or share their fate. Samuel did not blink. You have 1 hour to begin your withdrawal. After that, we will remove you ourselves. The amusement vanished. His yellow eyes narrowed with anger. You dare to threaten us. You are outnumbered and your fleet will be annihilated. Perhaps, but we came here to do what is right, and we are not leaving until it is done. The transmission ended abruptly as the commander cut the connection. Looked up from her console. All vessels are powering weapons and moving to intercept. Samuel sat back down in his command chair and took a deep breath. All ships, battle stations. Today we remind the galaxy what humans are made of. They had not fought humans in more than 100 years. Their military academies taught about human tactics and capabilities, but those lessons were based on old information and outdated assumptions. Admiral sat on his command throne aboard the flagship Devastator and watched the human fleet approach with what he believed was complete understanding of the situation. He was about to discover how wrong he was. The human ships spread into a wide formation as they advanced. To tactical doctrine, this appeared to be a mistake. Concentrating firepower was the foundation of naval warfare. Spreading your forces thin allowed the enemy to defeat you in detail. Allowed himself a cold smile. Perhaps the humans truly had grown soft during their decades of isolation. All ships target the human vessels at will, he ordered. Destroy them quickly so we can return to the more important work of finishing The fleet opened fire. Energy beams and plasma torpedoes streaked across the void toward the advancing human ships. The barrage was devastating. Human shields flared bright under the assault. 2 destroyers on the outer edge of the formation took direct hits and broke apart in explosions of fire and debris. A cruiser lost its forward section and tumbled out of control, spilling atmosphere and bodies into space. But the human fleet did not slow down. They did not attempt evasive maneuvers. They simply absorbed the punishment and kept coming. Sir, the tactical officer reported with confusion in his voice. The humans are not returning fire. Leaned forward, what? They are taking our attacks, but they are not shooting back. I do not understand their strategy. For a moment wondered if this was some kind of surrender. Perhaps the humans had realized the hopelessness of their situation and were preparing to negotiate. But that made no sense. If they wanted to surrender, they would have stopped advancing. Then the human fleet reached a specific distance from the formation, and everything changed. The human ships did not fire at the vessels themselves. Instead, they unleashed a coordinated barrage at the spaces between them. Missiles and energy weapons carved corridors through the blockade, creating gaps where none had existed before. It was not an attack designed to destroy the enemy fleet. It was an attack designed to create openings. And through those openings poured dozens of human dropships. Understood too late what was happening. The naval battle had never been the point. The humans had used their warships as shields to protect their troop transports. They had absorbed the fire to buy time for their ground forces to reach the planet. It was a tactic of sacrifice, and it was working. All ships intercept those transports, shouted. Do not let them reach the surface. The fleet attempted to redirect their fire toward the drop ships, but the human warships threw themselves into the path of every shot. They were not trying to win the space battle anymore. They were simply trying to survive long enough to complete their mission. On the bridge of the Defiance, Commander Samuel Wright watched the chaos unfold around him. Warning alarms blared from every direction. Damage reports flooded in from across the ship. The shields were failing and the hull was taking direct hits. Fires burned in multiple sections and crew members were dying at their stations. "Hull breach on Deck 7, reported, her voice strained but steady. "Sealing emergency bulkheads." "Maintain course," Samuel ordered. "Keep us between thee and those transports." Another explosion rocked the ship violently. Sparks showered from an overhead conduit, and a console on the far side of the bridge exploded, killing the officer stationed there. Danny was thrown from his seat but scrambled back up and resumed his duties without hesitation. "Sir, the carrier Victory is reporting critical damage. They are losing containment on their reactor." Samuel closed his eyes for a brief moment. Captain commanded the Victory. He had known her for 20 years. They had served together on 3 different ships. She had 2 children back on Earth who would grow up without a mother. "Tell them to evacuate if possible. If not, tell them we will remember their sacrifice." "Sir, Captain is refusing to evacuate. She says she can keep the ship functional long enough to provide additional cover." There was nothing to say to that. Was making the same choice Samuel would have made in her position. The mission came first. The lives of 30,000 innocent civilians were more important than any individual. The Victory exploded 3 minutes later, taking 800 human lives with it. But in those 3 minutes 12, more dropships made it through the blockade and entered the atmosphere of Velar Prime. Down on the planet's surface, they in their bunkers heard the distant roar of spacecraft entering the atmosphere. Elder looked up at the ceiling as if he could see through solid rock to the sky above. "What is that sound?" someone asked. Myra was monitoring their remaining communication equipment. Her 3 eyes went wide as she processed the data streaming across her screen. "Ships," she whispered, "human ships. They are landing all across the planet." A murmur spread through the bunker. People who had given up hope were suddenly uncertain. Could it be true? Had someone actually come to help them? Back in orbit, the battle raged with terrible intensity. The humans were losing ships faster than but they were also succeeding in their objective. More and more transports were breaking through the blockade. Ground forces were landing near major population centers and defensive positions. Admiral watched his tactical display with growing fury. This was not how the battle was supposed to proceed. The humans were supposed to be easy targets. They were supposed to flee or surrender when faced with superior numbers. Instead, they were dying by the hundreds to protect aliens they had never met. "Why do they not retreat?" he demanded. "They cannot win. They must know they cannot win." His tactical officer had no answer. They were predators by nature. They understood conquest and domination and the exercise of power. They did not understand sacrifice for its own sake. They could not comprehend the idea of dying for strangers. On the Defiance, Samuel Wright was bleeding from a wound on his forehead. The ship was barely functional now, with most systems failing and half the crew dead or wounded. But he could see the last of the troop transports entering the atmosphere. "Ground forces report successful landing," said. "They are engaging troops and moving toward civilian positions." Samuel allowed himself a single moment of relief. Whatever happened next, the mission had succeeded. Human soldiers were on the ground fighting to protect the sacrifice of so many ships and lives had not been wasted. "All remaining ships," he said into the fleet-wide communication channel. "Our transports are down. Now we fight for ourselves. All batteries open fire. Give them everything we have left." The human fleet had been holding back their offensive capabilities to focus on defense and creating openings. Now they unleashed their full firepower against the surprised enemy ships took hit after hit as the humans finally fought back with lethal intent. The battle in orbit would continue for many more hours. More ships would be destroyed on both sides. More lives would be lost in the cold darkness of space. But the crucial moment had passed. Human boots were on the ground. The siege of Velar Prime was about to become something very different. And in their underground bunker, the survivors listened to the distant sounds of fighting and dared to believe that perhaps they might live after all. Staff Sergeant Henry Cole was the first human soldier to set foot on Velar Prime. His armored boots hit the scorched earth at exactly 1400 hours local time, and he was already moving before the dust of his landing had settled. Behind him, the rest of his squad emerged from the dropship with weapons ready and eyes scanning for threats. Henry was 43 years old and had spent most of his adult life as a soldier. His face was hard and weathered from years of combat on a dozen different worlds, but his eyes held something that went beyond mere military professionalism. He believed in what he was doing. He believed that protecting innocent lives was the most important thing a person could do with their existence. "Spread out and establish a perimeter," he ordered through his helmet communicator. "We have forces in this area and they know we are here." Private Lisa Park moved to his right flank. She was 26 years old and this was her first major combat deployment. Her hands were steady on her rifle, but Henry could see the tension in her posture. She was scared. They all were, but fear did not stop them from doing their duty. Private Christopher took position on the left. He was even younger than Lisa, barely 20 years old with a face that still held the softness of youth. He had joined the military because he wanted to make a difference in the universe. Today, he would find out exactly what that meant. The landscape around them was devastation given form. They had landed in what had once been a residential district of a major city. Now it was nothing but rubble and ash. Buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to broken walls and scattered debris. The streets were cratered from orbital bombardment and littered with the bodies of those who had not escaped in time. Christopher stumbled when he saw a group of small bodies huddled together in the ruins of what might have been a school. They were children. They had been trying to hide when death found them. He stopped walking and stared at the scene with horror in his eyes. Henry put a hand on the young soldier's shoulder. "I know," he said quietly, "but we cannot help the dead. We can only fight for the living. Keep moving." Christopher nodded and forced himself to look away. But Henry knew that image would stay with him forever. It would stay with all of them. Some scars could not be seen. The squad advanced through the ruined city toward their objective. Intelligence reports indicated that the main civilian bunker was located 2 kilometers to the north. Thousands of survivors were sheltered there, and ground forces were already moving to breach the entrance. The race was on. They encountered the first patrol 3 blocks from their landing zone. A dozen enemy soldiers were moving through the rubble with weapons drawn. They were tall creatures with scaled skin and powerful builds. Their armor was heavy, and their weapons were designed to kill with brutal efficiency. They had never faced human ground forces before. They were completely unprepared for what happened next. Henry raised his rifle and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. 3 fell before the others even realized they were under attack. Lisa and Christopher opened fire from their positions, and more enemies dropped. The humans moved with speed and precision that seemed almost supernatural to their opponents. They flowed through the terrain like water, finding every angle of cover and exploiting every gap in the enemy formation. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. 12 lay dead, and the human squad had not suffered a single casualty. "Push forward," Henry commanded. "We are behind schedule." They continued through the destroyed city, encountering more enemy patrols along the way. Each engagement was swift and violent. The humans did not hesitate, and they did not show mercy. They were here to save lives, and anyone who stood in their way would be removed. Corporal Stephen Grant was the squad's heavy weapons specialist. He carried a plasma launcher that could destroy armored vehicles and fortified positions. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke unless he had something important to say. But when the squad encountered a barricade blocking the main approach to the bunker complex, he stepped forward without being asked. "Cover," he said simply. The squad took positions as Stephen aimed his weapon at the enemy fortification. The plasma bolt streaked across the open ground and struck the center of the barricade with devastating force. The explosion sent soldiers flying in all directions and opened a gap in their defensive line. "Through the breach," Henry ordered. They charged forward into the chaos. Hand-to-hand fighting erupted as they pushed through the shattered barricade. Henry found himself face to face with an officer who was larger and stronger than any human. The alien swung a heavy blade at his head, but Henry ducked under the attack and drove his combat knife into the gap between the creature's armor plates. The fell and Henry was already moving to his next target. Private Amy was the squad's medic. She stayed close to the center of the formation, providing covering fire when needed and ready to treat any wounded. So far they had been lucky. A few minor injuries, but nothing serious. She knew that luck would not last forever. They reached the bunker entrance just as a strike team was attempting to breach the massive doors. The enemy had brought heavy equipment to cut through the reinforced metal, and they were making progress. In minutes, they would break through, and the civilians inside would be helpless. "Open fire," Henry shouted. The human squad attacked from behind, catching them completely by surprise. The fighting was fierce and close. Energy weapons flashed in the dust and smoke. Bodies fell on both sides. Christopher took a hit to his shoulder armor that spun him around, but he kept fighting through the pain. Lisa was grazed by a shot that left a scorched line across her helmet, but she did not even slow down. When the battle ended, 2 human soldiers lay dead, and 3 more were wounded. But the bunker entrance was secure, and every single attacker had been eliminated. Henry approached the massive doors and activated his external speaker system. "This is Staff Sergeant Henry Cole of the Earth Defense Force. We are here to help. You are safe now." For a long moment there was no response. Then slowly the great doors began to open with a grinding sound of ancient machinery. Light from inside the bunker spilled out into the ruined world above. Elder stood in the doorway with Myra beside him. He stared at the armored figures before him with an expression of wonder that he could not hide. Behind him, thousands of survivors pressed forward to see the impossible thing that had happened. The humans had come. Against all logic and all reason, they had crossed the galaxy to fight and die for strangers. Had lived for many years, and he had seen wonders that most beings could not imagine. But nothing in his long life had prepared him for this moment. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why did you come? We are nothing to you. We have nothing to offer. There was no reason for you to risk so much for our sake." Henry removed his helmet, revealing a face covered with sweat and grime and blood from a cut above his eye. He was exhausted and battered, but his expression was calm, and his eyes were kind. "You asked for help," he said simply, "and helping people is what we do." Felt something shift inside him. A belief he had held his entire life was crumbling. He had always thought that the universe was governed by self-interest and calculation, that every species looked out for itself, and alliances were nothing more than temporary arrangements of convenience. The idea that someone would sacrifice so much for nothing in return seemed impossible. And yet here they stood, human soldiers who had fought and bled and died to protect people they had never met, not for profit or power or political advantage, just because it was the right thing to do. Myra stepped forward with tears streaming from all 3 of her eyes. "We thought we were alone," she said. "We thought the universe had forgotten us." Henry looked at her and then at the thousands of faces behind her, children clutching their parents, elderly who had accepted death and now found themselves alive, young people who would have a future after all. "You were never alone," he said. "You just had not met us yet." The battle for Velar Prime lasted 3 more days. In orbit, the human fleet fought with desperate fury against superior numbers. They lost more ships than anyone had expected. They buried more friends than anyone wanted to count. But they did not retreat and they did not surrender. They held the line until the job was done. On the ground, the fighting was even more brutal. Human soldiers pushed out from every landing zone, securing civilian bunkers and driving back forces. They fought in ruined cities and burned forests and shattered industrial zones. They fought at night without sleep and during the day without rest. Some of them died heroically in glorious last stands. Others died quietly from wounds that could not be treated in time. All of them died far from home on a world they had never seen before, fighting for people they would never know. Admiral watched his invasion crumble with growing desperation. His ground forces were being annihilated by human soldiers who seemed to be everywhere at once. His fleet was taking losses that would take years to replace. And for what? For a planet that had no strategic value, for a species that had nothing worth taking. On the third day, he made the decision to withdraw. The Empire had never retreated from a conquest before. The shame would follow him for the rest of his life. But the alternative was complete destruction, and that was a price even his pride could not accept. The last ship fled Velar Prime at sunset on the third day. They left behind the wreckage of their ambitions and the bodies of their soldiers, and a profound confusion about what had happened. They had been winning. They had been so close to victory. And then everything had changed because a species from the other side of the galaxy had decided that letting innocent people die was unacceptable. Commander Samuel Wright stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the retreat. His ship was barely functional. The hull was with damage from dozens of hits. Half of his crew was dead or wounded. But they had won. Against all odds and all expectations, they had won. Sat at her station with a bandage wrapped around her arm and exhaustion written on her face. Danny had a black eye and a broken rib, but he was still at his post. Sergeant Maria stood silently near the back of the bridge with tears running down her weathered cheeks. She was not crying from sadness. She was crying because, for the first time in years, she was proud to be human. "Casualty reports are coming in," said quietly. "We lost 18 ships and over 4,000 personnel. Ground forces suffered 1,200 dead and 3,000 wounded." Samuel nodded slowly. Each of those numbers represented a person with a name and a story and people who loved them. The victory had cost more than he wanted to think about. And the approximately 28,000 survivors confirmed. We saved most of them. 28,000 lives. That was what all this sacrifice had purchased. 28,000 beings who would continue to exist because humans had decided their existence mattered. A communication came through from Earth Command. The message was brief and to the point. The Galactic Council was outraged. Humanity had violated a dozen treaties and the will of the galaxy's governing body. There were threats of sanctions and economic isolation and even military action. Samuel read the message and then deleted it without responding. He did not care what the council thought. He had not asked their permission to do what was right, and he did not need their approval now that it was done. Down on the surface of Velar Prime, a ceremony was taking place. The sun had risen on a world that was but not destroyed. The sky was clear of enemy ships for the first time in almost 2 months. And in an open plaza that had been cleared of rubble, the surviving had gathered to thank the people who had saved them. Elder stood before his people with Staff Sergeant Henry Cole and his soldiers lined up behind him. The human troops looked exhausted and battered. Their armor was dented and scorched. Some of them had wounds that were still healing. But they stood straight and proud because they knew what they had accomplished. Spoke in a voice that carried across the crowd and was broadcast to every corner of the planet. For generations, we believed that the universe was ruled by power alone. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak suffered whatever they must. We believed that kindness was weakness, and compassion was a luxury no species could afford. We were taught that survival was the only thing that mattered and that principles were for fools who did not understand how the galaxy really worked. He paused and turned to face the human soldiers. These men and women proved that everything we believed was wrong. They came from a distant world to stand beside us in our darkest hour. They did not ask what we could give them in return. They did not calculate whether saving us was worth the cost. They simply saw that we were suffering, and they chose to end that suffering whatever the price. The crowd was silent. Many of them were weeping openly. They had been so certain that they were going to die. They had accepted extinction as inevitable, and then the humans had arrived and changed everything. From this day forward, they stand with humanity. Wherever they go and whatever challenges they face, they will not face them alone. This is not politics. This is not strategy. This is a debt that can never be repaid. It can only be honored through generations of friendship and loyalty. Henry Cole shifted uncomfortably. He had never been comfortable with praise or ceremony. He was a soldier. He did his job and he did not expect thanks for it. But he could see what this moment meant to thee, and so he stood still and accepted their gratitude with as much grace as he could manage. After the ceremony, a young girl approached him. She was the same child he had seen in the bunker, the one clutching the small carved stone figure. Her name was, and she was 6 years old. She had watched her father die in the first attack and had spent weeks underground believing she would never see sunlight again. She held out the stone figure toward Henry. It was clearly her most precious possession, the only thing she had left of her father. She was offering it to him as a gift. "Thank you," she said in halting English. The words had been practiced and rehearsed, but the emotion behind them was genuine. Henry knelt down so that he was at her eye level. Gently he pushed the gift back toward her. "You keep it," he said softly. "And when you grow up, I want you to remember this day. Remember what happened here. And if you ever see someone who needs help, I want you to help them. Not because you owe us anything, but because it is the right thing to do. That is how you thank us, by being the kind of person who makes the universe a little bit better." Nodded solemnly and clutched the stone figure to her chest. She did not fully understand everything he was saying. She was too young for that, but she understood enough, and she would remember. As the human ships rose into the sky and disappeared into the star-filled darkness, Elder watched them go. He had lived a long life and seen many things, but nothing had ever moved him like this. The galaxy would remember what happened here. The other species would watch and wonder and slowly begin to question everything they had believed about power and weakness and what really mattered in the end. Some would dismiss the humans as naive fools. Others would fear them as dangerous idealists. But a few would look at what they had done and feel something stirring in their own hearts. Because the humans had proven something that day. They had proven that compassion was not weakness, that principle was not foolishness, that a small group of people who believed in something bigger than themselves could change the fate of an entire world. The universe was vast and dark and filled with countless horrors, but somewhere out there humans were watching, and when innocent people cried out for help, they would come. That knowledge changed everything. On the long journey home, Samuel Wright stood alone on the observation deck of the Defiance and looked out at the stars. He thought about the friends he had lost and the price they had paid. He thought about the 28,000 lives they had saved and the future those people would now have. Found him there an hour later. "The council is still sending angry messages," she said. Samuel smiled faintly. "Let them be angry. We did the right thing." "I know. I just wanted to tell you that I am proud to have served under your command." He turned to look at her. "I am proud of all of you, every single person in this fleet. We showed the galaxy who we are today." "And who are we?" Samuel thought about the question for a moment before answering. "We are the people who come when hope fades. We are the ones who stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. We are humans, and we never stop fighting for what is right." nodded and turned to leave, but at the doorway she paused. "Do you think we will have to do this again?" Samuel looked back at the stars. Somewhere out there other species were watching. Other civilizations were facing their own darkest hours. Other children were hiding in bunkers wondering if anyone would come to save them. "Yes," he said quietly, "and when that day comes we will be ready." The Defiance continued on its course toward home, carrying its crew of wounded heroes through the endless night. Behind them, the lights of Velar Prime glowed soft and warm against the darkness. A world that had been saved. A people who would survive. Because, when hope had faded, human soldiers had arrived. And everything had changed.